My name is Isabel Ramirez, but in my family home, I was nothing more than a disgrace. On Thanksgiving night in Colorado Springs, my father, Colonel Richard Ramirez, retired, raised his glass high. His voice boomed across the cabin, praising my brother Daniel, a Marine Corps major, as the pride of our bloodline. Then his eyes slid past me like I wasn't even there. "A son who brings honor," he declared, "not a daughter who quit for a meaningless desk job." The laughter died. Every eye turned away. I sat frozen, a ghost at my own table. What they didn't know was that my so-called desk job was a cover for missions my brother doesn't even have clearance to hear. They wanted me invisible. Instead, they were about to meet Specter. To understand why those words cut deeper than shrapnel, you need to know the house I grew up in. Our family home in Colorado Springs looked warm from the outside, flags neatly folded in glass cases, metals polished and framed, but inside, love was rationed like rations in the field. My father, Colonel Richard Ramirez, carried himself like every day was inspection. For him, discipline was love. And Daniel, my younger brother, was the golden recruit who never failed inspection. From the time we were kids, he was the heir to the Ramirez legacy. Every touchdown Daniel scored, every uniform he put on, earned parades at our dinner table. For me, things were different. When I brought home straight A's, my father barely glanced up from his boots. When I placed first at track meets, he called it luck. Success wasn't cause for celebration, it was a requirement. One memory never leaves me. I was 10, and my shadow, a German shepherd named Major, was waiting for me every afternoon when I came home from school. He was my confidant, the one who never cared if I was fast enough or tough enough. One day, I came home to an empty yard. My father didn't even look up from his study when he said, "Flat and cold." I gave him to another family. He was too soft. That night, I cried into a pillow until I couldn't breathe. But a lesson had been stamped into me harder than any academy drill. In my father's world, affection was conditional. Love was something you earned, and if you weren't strong enough, you were discarded. It was then I decided I would never be discarded. If he refused to see me, the army would. I carried that vow like a rucksack, heavier than any issued gear. At 18, while most kids my age were worried about prom dates or college roommates, I was standing on the parade ground at West Point, the Hudson River glinting in the morning Sunday. I had clawed my way into that institution with nothing but sheer will, and I was determined to prove that discipline was my birthright, even if affection was not. The academy broke many, but it built me. I thrived on the sleepless nights, the brutal drills, the endless inspections. Pain felt familiar, almost comforting. I excelled in physical readiness, aced my classes, and graduated near the top of my cohort. The day of my commissioning, the camera flash froze, a perfect moment, me in my gray uniform, beaming with pride. My father stood beside me, his hand resting stiffly on my shoulder like a drill instructor, not a dad. His only words were, "Don't disappoint me." No hug. No, "I'm proud of you." Just a heavier burden strapped to my back. 2 years later, Daniel graduated basic training at Paris Island. He wasn't even an officer, but my father threw him a backyard party with banners, speeches, and a crowd of relatives. I stood in the corner, watching as Dad slung an arm around his Marine son like a king presenting his heir. That's when I understood the Ramirez rules. For me, achievement was mandatory. For Daniel, it was celebrated. My own path soon veered into shadows. A recruiter approached me quietly, sliding across classified paperwork that never left the room. I had been selected for a special mission unit under JSOC, one of those commands whose names don't appear on websites or brochures. Getting in required surviving a crucible designed to break even the strongest soldiers. I emerged battered, scarred, but accepted. My call sign, Specter. But my family could never know. To them, I became the daughter who quit. I delivered the lie like a poison pill. I was leaving active service for a desk job in logistics. My father's face hardened, his disappointment carved deep. He turned to the window, muttering, I thought you were made of better stuff." My mother cried not for me, but for the shame. And I had to let it happen. The truth was classified, sealed behind layers of clearance. So began the double life. By day, I was Isabel Ramirez, supply chain manager, trapped in a cubicle with the drone of fluorescent lights. My boss, Gary, would drop stacks of invoices on my desk and remind me to smile more. I nodded, swallowed the bitterness, and typed. To my family, I was a failure wearing office clothes. By night, I was Colonel Ramirez Specter, covered in grime and sweat, whispering commands into a comms unit as my team moved silently through alleys in nameless villages. On one side, stale coffee and spreadsheets. On the other, night vision and satellite feeds. Two realities tearing me in half. The strain showed in small ways. I missed birthdays, holidays, and the rare times I showed up. My parents only asked about Daniel's latest achievement. Thanksgiving dinners turned into rituals of humiliation. Dad's speeches praising the true warrior. Daniel, my own service, buried in secrecy, went unseen. The lowest moments weren't the firefights overseas, but the loneliness back home, like the night my old pickup died on I-25 during a snowstorm. I could have called my father, but I knew I'd get a lecture about poor maintenance. I could have called Daniel, but he'd treat me like an idiot. So I called a tow truck, sat alone in the freezing cab, and paid the $1,000 repair bill myself. That was the cost of being invisible. Sometimes I'd replay a memory of General Ann Dunwoody speaking at West Point. I never thought about being the first woman. I just thought about being the best officer I could be. Those words stayed with me like an ember in the cold. They reminded me why I endured. Still, the cracks widened. Every mission I commanded abroad saved lives, but back home I couldn't save my own dignity at the dinner table. My father's West Point ring, the family legacy, glinted on his finger as if it was already destined for Daniel. Each time I saw it, I felt both the weight of tradition and the sting of exclusion. Then came the call that shifted everything. My parents rang one Saturday, voices honeyed with false warmth. After pleasantries, the truth emerged. Daniel was applying for a prestigious course, and they wanted me to use my connections to push his application. The same cover job they scorned was suddenly useful. When I hesitated, my father snapped, "Stop pretending to have principles. Don't disappoint this family any further." I caved, as I always had, and hated myself for it. That night, rage boiled over into tears I hadn't shed in years. I realized the pattern would never end. To them, I was not a daughter. I was a tool. And then came the dinner at the Penrose Room. I dressed carefully, foolishly clinging to hope. But hope died when I realized it was a showcase, not a family meal. Guests, business partners, another colonel's wife, all there to witness Daniel's coronation. When my father pulled out the velvet box and handed the West Point ring to Daniel, bypassing me entirely, my chest went hollow. That ring should have been mine. Instead, I became a prop, proof of their narrative. In that moment, I knew. The years of silence were over. I rose from my seat, every eye on me. My voice didn't shake. "You're right, Dad," I said. "That ring belongs to the one who carries on your legacy. And now I understand I'm not part of it, and I don't want to be." I placed my napkin neatly on the table, turned, and walked away. The night air outside the Penrose Room cut like ice. I walked past glittering chandeliers and polished cars, but I felt nothing except the pounding of my own heartbeat. Inside, my family toasted Daniel with champagne. Outside, I finally buried the desperate daughter who had lived for their approval. I drove with no destination, headlights slicing through the mountain roads above Colorado Springs. I pulled over at an overlook, the city lights twinkling below like a constellation I would never belong to. For the first time, rage cooled into clarity. This wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. And truth, if wielded properly, could be a weapon. I pulled a government-issue notebook from my glove compartment, the same kind I used to plan operations overseas. In the dim glow of the dashboard, I began to write. Objective, liberation. Enemy, the lie. Assets, classified. Risks, exposure, alienation. Career, end state, truth revealed. It was clinical, methodical, just another mission. And every mission begins with allies. I knew who I had to call. My former commanding officer, the man who had recruited me into JSOC, the one who had given me the name Specter, General Jonathan Blake. He wasn't just any four-star. He was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest uniformed officer in the United States military. He had seen me in combat, trusted me with lives, and knew exactly who I was. At 0200, I sat at my desk, powering up a hardened laptop. Not my civilian computer, the secure one, linked to networks my family could never imagine. My hand trembled as I hovered over the call button. This was the point of no return. Pressing it would detonate the life I had built in silence. I thought of Brené Brown's words I'd once scribbled on a sticky note. Vulnerability is having the courage to show up and be seen when you can't control the outcome. I pressed the button. The screen flickered, then steadied. A man's face appeared, hard lines carved by decades of service, silver stars glinting faintly in the background. "Specter," he said, his voice deep, steady. "It's been a while." "Sir," I replied, my voice even. "I need your help." I didn't give him classified details. I didn't have to. I told him the personal truth. Years of erasure, the ring handed to my brother, the silence that had become unbearable. He listened without interruption, eyes steady, a commander evaluating a soldier's report. Finally, he nodded. "You've carried enough alone. Tell me what you need." The relief nearly buckled me. "I need them to know, General. Not the operations, not the targets, just who I am. That I was never what they said, that I served." His answer was crisp, decisive. "Then we'll make it official." The next day, I called my parents. I kept my tone professional, almost detached. "We need to meet. It's about my professional future." That phrasing guaranteed they'd come half curious, half eager to hear me beg for their approval again. After hanging up, I opened the notebook again. Operation Truth. Phase 1, the setting. I chose their own living room, the same place where my father had delivered countless lectures about honor. Phase 2, the reinforcement. General Blake would arrive in full Class A uniform, ribbons spanning his chest, the 4 silver stars undeniable. His presence alone would dismantle every lie. Phase 3, the strike. He would call me by my true rank. He would confirm my service not in detail, but in the broad strokes that only a commander could deliver. That single word colonel, spoken by a 4-star, would hit harder than any evidence I could present. Phase 4, silence. After the truth landed, I wouldn't gloat, wouldn't scream. I would let the silence do the work. Silence was my most powerful weapon. As the day approached, doubt gnawed at me. What if this cost me everything? What if my family twisted even this into another performance? What if General Blake's appearance violated some invisible line? But then I remembered every humiliation, every dismissal. My father turning away at my commissioning. My mother crying for the shame of a daughter who quit. My brother basking in celebrations I never had. And I knew the greater risk was doing nothing. I spent the night before the meeting at Tom and Pat Gallagher's home. They didn't ask questions. Pat handed me a warm cup of tea. Tom simply said, "Whatever battle you're walking into, kiddo, remember, don't fight for their respect. Fight for your own peace." The next morning, I stood in front of a mirror, my dress blues immaculate, medals aligned perfectly. I studied my reflection not as the forgotten daughter, but as the officer I had always been. My father had erased me at his table. Tomorrow, the truth would redraw me in indelible ink. Operation Truth was ready. The Ramirez living room had always felt like a courtroom, my father presiding in his armchair like a judge handing out sentences. That night was no different. He sat ramrod straight, ring glinting under the lamp. Daniel at his side in marine dress blues. My mother perched nervously on the sofa. When I walked in, silence fell. My own uniform drew their eyes instantly. My navy dress blues, rows of ribbons, polished insignia gleaming. My father's jaw tightened. "So you've decided to play soldier again?" he sneered. "A little show for your brother's benefit?" I didn't answer. I simply took my place by the fireplace, the same spot where I'd once been scolded as a child. A knock at the door cut through the tension. My father frowned but barked, "Daniel, see who it is." When Daniel opened the door, he froze. Then, stiffly, he snapped to attention. General Jonathan Blake stepped inside, the 4 silver stars on his shoulders shining like cold fire. His Class A uniform was immaculate, ribbons stretching across his chest in a spectrum of campaigns and commands. Even my father, Colonel Ramirez, retired, lurched to his feet instinctively, old habits of deference too ingrained to suppress. "General," my father stammered, "what brings you?" Blake's voice cut him off, calm but commanding. "I'm here at the request of Colonel Isabel Ramirez." The words detonated like artillery. My mother gasped. Daniel's eyes widened. My father's face drained of color. "Colonel," he whispered. Blake's gaze didn't waver. "Yes, Colonel Ramirez. Known to some of us as Specter. I had the honor of recruiting her into a special mission unit under JSOC. I trusted her with missions that shaped the security of this nation. She has led men and women into danger, saved lives, and carried burdens you can't begin to imagine." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel sank into a chair as though the weight of his uniform had doubled. My father's voice cracked. "That can't be," she told us. She left. "That was a cover," Blake said sharply. "A necessity to protect operational security. You see, not everyone earns the right to know the truth, even family." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I let it stretch, the way silence does when truth settles deeper than words. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady. "All those years you called me a disappointment. All those dinners where I sat invisible while you toasted Daniel. All the times you said I wasn't strong enough. I was carrying out missions you don't even have clearance to read." Daniel looked at me, eyes wide, as if seeing me for the first time. "Izzy, you were Specter?" I nodded once. "Yes. While you were being celebrated at home, I was leading raids in cities you'll never visit. Every scar I bear came from battles fought in silence." My father swayed, gripping the arm of his chair. "Why didn't you tell us?" I stepped closer, metals glinting under the light. "Because the uniform isn't about telling stories at Thanksgiving. It's about carrying the weight so others don't have to. I gave you the only truth I could, my silence, and you used it to erase me." Blake stepped forward, his presence filling the room. "Colonel Ramirez has earned more than silence. She has earned respect. I would serve under her again without hesitation. Can you say the same?" My father's lips trembled. For the first time in my life, I saw not the Iron Colonel, but an old man crushed by the enormity of his mistake. He sank back into his chair, unable to meet my eyes. My mother wept openly, whispering apologies too late to matter. I turned to Daniel. "All my life I envied you. You had what I never did, their pride. But now you know the truth. I wasn't their disgrace. I was their shield." Daniel's face crumpled. "Izzy, He stopped, words failing. Then he stood, slowly, and saluted me. Not as a brother, but as a Marine, acknowledging a superior. The gesture hit harder than anything my father could have said. I returned the salute, then lowered my hand. "General Blake, thank you," I said quietly. He nodded. "My duty was simple. To confirm the truth. The rest is yours." With that, he turned and left, the echo of his boots marking the end of an era. I looked back at my family one last time. You wanted a daughter who begged for your approval. She doesn't exist anymore. What stands before you is an officer, a soldier, a survivor. Whether you claim me or not no longer matters." The silence that followed was complete. My father's head bowed. My mother sobbed. Daniel's salute still lingered in the air. I walked out of the Ramirez house with my spine straight, medals gleaming. For the first time, I felt taller than the shadows that had haunted me since childhood. Operation Truth had been executed, and its victory was absolute. The days after Operation Truth felt strangely quiet. For years, silence had been a prison. Now it was freedom. My father stopped calling, my mother sent letters she couldn't finish, and Daniel began visiting in uniform. Not as the Golden Son, but as a brother learning to listen. I no longer needed their recognition, but I accepted his. It was the first time I'd seen his eyes hold something other than rivalry. Respect was a bridge we built slowly, one brick at a time. The deeper healing came elsewhere. Tom and Pat Gallagher, my chosen family, welcomed me like no explanations were necessary. Their kitchen table became my safe house, their laughter the antidote to years of silence. Pat would nudge me to eat more. Tom would tell stories of his Marine days, and together we stitched a kind of family my blood never gave me. 7 years later, I stood in a different kind of room, the Pentagon auditorium, filled with uniforms from every branch, flags draped across the stage, cameras flashing. My chest felt heavy with the weight of every scar, every mission, every night spent in shadows. When the Secretary of Defense pinned the second star on my shoulder, the announcement echoed, "Ladies and gentlemen, Major General Isabel Ramirez." The applause rolled like thunder. I caught my reflection in the polished floor and barely recognized the woman staring back, no longer invisible, no longer erased. In the front row, General Blake, retired, now watched with quiet pride. As he shook my hand, he leaned close and said, "The world knows you now, Specter, and it always should have." And there, among officers and allies, I saw them. My father, standing slowly, clapping with trembling hands. My mother, wiping tears she no longer hid. Daniel smiling wide, his salute sharp, proud. The fracture hadn't disappeared, but something stronger had taken root. I didn't need their approval anymore. But that day, I let their applause wash over me not as validation, but as closure. When I walked off the stage, Tom and Pat were waiting. Pat hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. Tom winked and said, "Guess we'll need a bigger coffee mug. World's best general has a nice ring." We laughed, and for once, the sound didn't feel borrowed. It felt like home. I tell you this not to boast, but to remind you, family is not defined by blood. Family is defined by presence, by who shows up, who stands beside you in the fire, who claps when you rise. Maybe you've been called a disgrace. Maybe your victories were ignored, your pain unseen. Maybe you've been erased at your own table. If you have, hear me now. You are not alone. Stand tall in your silence. Wear your scars like medals. Build the family that chooses you, and honor yourself even when others refuse. Because the truth is this: some inherit rings, but others inherit purpose, and purpose is the greater legacy. If you're still here with me, it means this story was meant for you. Subscribe, share your own story in the comments, and remember, blood may turn its back, but honor will always stand tall.